All right, well, it's a couple minutes after 4, so we're going to go on ahead and get started. My name is Caitlin. I'm part of the marketing team here at Gatsby. And before I hand things over to Kyle, I have a few housekeeping things. First, we are captioning this webinar. If you need captions, they're available at the URL that's linked in the chat. We will, of course, be doing an extended question and answer period for this webinar, and we are using a new application called Slido for our questions. I just put information in the chat. To submit a question, you'll go to slido.com, that's SLIDO.com, and you'll input the code 5683. And then you can submit your questions that way. If you're having a problem with it, you can, of course, submit a question through the GoToWebinar control panel as well, but Slido is pretty cool, so we hope you'll use it. Today we are doing this town hall webinar. We'll be sharing some news and information about cloud, and our host today, or our speaker today, is Kyle Mathews, our CEO and one of our co-founders. So Kyle, I'm going to hand it off to you now.
Hello, everyone. Super excited to be here and present a few updates about what we've been up to and take your questions. So with that, I will share my screen and we'll jump in. So let's see. Cool. So yes, first, Kyle Mathews, CEO. Follow me on Twitter, GitHub, etc. First, Gatsby. We are creating tools to help you build the modern web. We, are kind of integrating together like a ton of advancements that have happened in front-end technology, cloud computing, etc., to kind of give you kind of a new paradigm for building websites and web apps. Gatsby Cloud is our effort to, kind of build cloud services for Gatsby that glue everything together and give you like a really pleasant environment for creating and deploying Gatsby sites. So some things that we've been working on is first Gatsby Preview. It's like a real-time preview of changes to your content and code. And we think of it as kind of like a private playground for everyone working on the project to be able to like test stuff and change things and see what it's going to look like in real time without having to commit to deploying it. So you think of it as like a house that's like, Gatsby Preview is sort of this magic house that you can, swap things out and then see not just like a preview of a single page, but like see how the entire site changes and have very like fast feedback. So it's like you change a window or you change the paint color and you can walk through the entire house to see how that change in paint color like look and feel if it were real. And that's a really awesome preview experience. So kind of a quick demo of that here. We can watch. This is actually on our GatsbyJS.com website, dog fooding. So yeah, you can see that we changed the title there and updated on the right. To the right is like the preview, and then on the left is the contentful edit screen. So yeah, so it's like almost near real time updates. I need to go to the presentation. Okay, so another thing we're working on is something called Gatsby Builds, and it's in private beta. Later, we'll show you how you can like sign up to be part of that early in that private beta. But Gatsby Builds is basically a CI/CD system for if you use like Circle CI or Travis CI or Netlify or Zeit or AWS Code Build. There's a bunch of other services that will take your GitHub repo and build it on demand, like when things change. And so it's very much in similar lines with that. And Heroku 2, of course, sort of originated all this stuff back in the day. But it's tailored specifically to Gatsby applications so that things are really, really fast and foolproof, and you get great feedback as you go. And highlighting this, of course, too, is that we're working towards incremental builds, which is, if, back to the house metaphor, if you change the paint color on the front door, only the front door will be rebuilt on the actual website, which will mean that, the rest of it will just be cached and won't have to change, which will make incremental builds much faster than they would be otherwise. So the long-term goal is that builds just kind of disappear as a thing, that they're so fast that you don't even really have to think about them anymore. Because builds, pre-building a site, it makes a ton of sense architecturally, because it's, why would you want to create pages on the fly when somebody requests it? It's the absolute worst time to put together a page, because the user says, I want this thing, and then you're just like, oh, hold on a second, I haven't done anything yet. I got to like create the page, and you got to like do database calls and do a bunch of looping over data and generating stuff, and then you finally send it back. Of course, with modern computers, it's like relatively fast, but still, it adds unnecessary delay. So our whole goal is that everything that can be done ahead of time is done ahead of time. And we want to do it in a way that there's no compromises there. You don't have to be like, well, okay, like, we do a build and that saves time for the user, but it, adds a lot of friction to our development and content workflows, because, we have this slow build time. With this build service, we're going to be borrowing a lot of like techniques from kind of like streaming code build services that will, make the process like super fast. Anyway, and the end result for y'all will be a really smooth workflows, and so you get all the benefits of like doing work ahead of time, but without any of the downsides of kind of like slow workflows and also delays in getting changes into production. So another cool thing too about our service is that we're pretty unopinionated about how you deploy the site. So our service is just a CI/CD, and then we can deploy your site and incremental builds anywhere you go. So it's kind of like a little visualization, data changes, get changes. They go into Gatsby builds, and then you can configure different hosting options that will push updated files to. So another cool thing that we're working on is automatic lighthouse reports. And Gatsby does a lot to help you make your site fast automatically, but of course, like, we can't prevent you from accidentally causing slowdowns. Like, it's very common that you're working away on a site and you test it and it's like, yeah, it's fast, and then weeks later you test it again, and at some point in between, somebody added a big JavaScript library, or somebody added like a script that was like sort of not set up right, and so it's like blocking loading of other things. Anyways, there's lots of ways to slow down your site. And just the same way that testing, like software testing, is now considered almost like mandatory for any sort of like software development, to prevent regressions and to prevent unanticipated behaviors from like entering into the code base. The same way as performance, that we need to be continually monitoring our performance, that like every time we put up a PR, we need to check that the performance has not like regressed since the last time from the master branch. And only in doing that can we ensure that like our sites are going to be consistently fast, even under heavy development. And so this is kind of a screenshot of our the interface. So it's like, this is a PR that just had a build, and then it shows the lighthouse scores down below. So it's a ton of interesting stuff that we're already doing and that we can do with this in the future to help teams ship consistently fast sites. So what's next? So we're working really heavy on builds and improving build times, and adding incremental build into that. And as I said, we're in private beta. We're onboarding slowly some early testers of what we got so far, and things are looking really promising. We'll have a lot more about that in January. Also, we're putting our data up front and center. So we're creating a kind of a benchmarking service for builds that will show how fast our builds are, and how much faster we are getting than other services, because it's not one thing that makes builds faster. We're working on a huge number of different techniques to parallelize builds, to improve caching, to improve kind of like the throughput of like different activities that Gatsby does during the build process and so forth. And then in open source, yeah, we're continuing to push a lot of improvements into kind of the core Gatsby open source tools. And so, if we ask people, what do you love about Gatsby open source? They say performance, developer experience is the two things, like website performance and like just it's like a nice cohesive environment for building things. And also, of course, we ask people what what they're complaining about. It's often those things too, because these are kind of like core to the experience. And so, one of the things that we're doing is like been staffing out the number of people working on Gatsby. And so, one of our recent hires is a dedicated performance engineer. He was a JS infrastructure engineer at Facebook and brings a ton of experience for, helping JavaScript tooling and JavaScript applications scale. And so he's already been making a lot of improvements to our code base, and we'll be doing a lot more of this in the future. And so one of the initiatives that he started is he's working with community members who have large sites and to find different things that are slowing it down. So he's already found people have been sending him sites, and he's been like profiling them and finding and fixing performance bugs in like the build process, which will improve performance for everyone. So also we're pushing really hard on improving like key integrations. Integrations is really what makes Gatsby special, in that you have Gatsby, which has like the React development environment, React runtime, but then we also have different data sources, and like when you tie those two together, then you have something that's really special, that you can build CMS-like websites, but with modern web technology. And the key to making that work is really good, really tight integration between the CMS and Gatsby. And so several of these, we've hired more help to improve them. So 2 engineers are busily working on rebuilding Gatsby source WordPress, use WPGraphQL. And the upshot of that is that WordPress will soon support incremental builds and preview, and just be way more scalable than the current Gatsby source WordPress is. We're also hiring a Drupal specialist, so there's a ton of interest in the Drupal community for using Gatsby, and we want to make that integration a lot better. Another thing that we've been thinking a lot about is just like how we design our APIs, that we want to have kind of like two approaches, that we want to have like a sharp knife, that like anything you need to do, you can do it. But for kind of the happy path, for the normal thing that you want to do, we have simple declarative tools. And we know that like some of our APIs get more complaints than others. And what we've figured out is that the APIs that get more complaints, they're kind of like only a sharp knife. There's not like kind of a simpler declarative version that most of the time that people can use. So they're like, why am I, because sharp knives tend to be a little more verbose because they're lower level. And so people are like, why am I spending so much time, writing like really intricate code to make this happen? It seems like there should be an easier way. And so we're kind of in about reevaluating some of our APIs, and then we're going to, create the easier way for these in the new year. And so some of these are examples like GraphQL, creating pages, etc. And we can do a lot to simplify, common development workflows for people. So yeah, so high level, we're working to make Gatsby better, faster, and easier to use for individuals and teams. So yeah, so I wanted to next give a little quick demo of Gatsby Cloud. So first is, we launched Gatsby Cloud general availability a few weeks ago. And so if you go to gatsbyjs.com, you can just click Get Started for free. And then there's 2 options. If you have a Gatsby site that you want to try out like preview on Gatsby Cloud, you can then just start importing it here. But if not, you just want to play around with things, you can choose one of the starters that we have here. And so I'll just go with the default starter here, a portfolio site with Datto CMS. And then you click Get Started, and then get into the process. So first thing is picking the name. So webinar Datto CMS site. Sounds like a great name. And then add a test tube. So probably just want to delete this at some point. Yeah, and then you can put it in any of your, and then we create a GitHub or a repo for you on GitHub. By default, it goes to your personal GitHub account, but you can also choose an organization if you'd like. I'll just put on my personal one, and then it creates the repository. Should take just a few seconds. Cool. And then next step is to connect to the CMS provider, and we just have to authorize Datto CMS to, well, actually authorize Gatsby Cloud to set up the CMS instance. And so we do that, and then that's really quick. So it's already done that. I'll click Start New Site. Cool. So now we've provisioned it. So open up this real quick here. So this is the project that just got created. And then go back here and click Finish, and then we'll be onto the site dashboard. And so a few things going on here. You can see the GitHub repo linked to from there. So this is the site that was set up on GitHub. So if you want to like immediately clone it and start developing locally, you can do that. And then over here, we're seeing that it's working on creating the preview. And if you click into the preview, you can see more detail, including like the logs. So yeah, so now it's installing that. And I think I have, yeah, so in the meantime, let's play around with another one that I already have started. So Sanity is another CMS that we have configured to work with Gatsby Desktop. And so I'll just get that site up and running. Okay, so, oops. Okay, so now we have, this is the CMS here. Okay, so now let me just get these two next to each other. Okay, so now what we can do is we can change things in the editor, and then if you watch over here, it'll be updating those in real time. So we can change, we delete is cool, we say really fun, and then that updates. And if we wanted to like say add a new project, we just go here, we say presented webinar about Gatsby, generate the slug, and then hi webinar watchers, and then yeah, like publish it and so forth. So yeah, so this is just kind of an example of how Gatsby Preview like lets you play around with stuff. This is just sort of like we're talking about, it's like a playground. None of this is being saved; it's all draft, but you can immediately see how it's going to change your website when you are updating the CMS. Then we go back here. Now this is live. Is data CMS having trouble? Maybe I will not demo this. Not entirely sure what's going on here. Might be logged into the wrong user. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I think that was the problem. Okay, so then, oh yeah, enter project. So this is, again, the portfolio site. And then just a quick example of, editing stuff. So like, say, for example, you decided that flyer 2 was, a better kind of representation of your work, and you want to have that first. You could just like drag it up to the top. Show it again, drag it up to the top. And then you go over here, and then in a second, yeah, it updates. You'd be like, okay, flyer 1, having 2 flyers next to each other isn't as cool, so just move that down here a bit. And then a bit later, you're like, cool, looks great. And then, on you go. Cool, so that's, yeah, Gatsby Desktop. You can see all your different sites that you create, enter into them, make changes, see preview, and so forth. Okay, so that is the demo, and so I encourage you all to try out Gatsby Cloud if you haven't yet, and we'll now jump over to answering questions. So Linda, how do you want to do this? Just
Great.
start.
Yeah. So Kyle, I will seize control of the screen share.
Seize control.
Yes. And
Seize control the means of production.
Yes.
Excellent.
And we are now presenting. Okay, so our first question is, what is the plan for supporting other source control services besides GitHub, for example, GitLab, etc.?
Yeah, we absolutely plan on doing that. Basically, right now, all of our engineering resources is on getting builds ready, because that is by far our most requested feature. It's a very exciting thing. Once you make builds dramatically faster, it's both like a nice quality of life improvement for everyone who's already using Gatsby, but there's just a lot of sites that you just flat out can't use Gatsby right now because builds are too slow. Whether the site's too big or they just like can't have a 5-minute deploy. Like we just need that, like e-commerce is a common one, media, newspaper type thing. Like they need like really fast deployment. And so we want to get that out of the gate, and then we'll be circling back to supporting other stuff like GitLab and Bitbucket.
Cool. And just a reminder to everyone, if you have a question, you can go to slido.com, that's SLIDO, and you input the code 5683. And of course, if that's not working for you, you can submit a question through the GoToWebinar control panel. So our next question is, are incremental builds planned for Gatsby open source or exclusively for Gatsby Cloud?
Yeah, that's a great question. People ask us about a lot. Incremental builds is a funny word, and I don't think we've explained it well enough. Because at the end of the day, incremental builds just means something was cached from the previous build. And then the more that's cached, the less work the quote unquote incremental build has to do. So that's kind of the example of the house. Like if you want to swap out the door, why rebuild the house when you can just swap out the door? But what a lot of people don't realize is that Gatsby from the get-go has had like a very extensive cache, and that if you preserve that cache between builds, builds are way, way faster. Like a lot of people say like, oh, my Gatsby builds are so slow. And then we almost always say, well, do you preserve the cache? And then they're like, no. And then they do, and they like come back and they're like, oh, it went from like 15 minutes to like 3 minutes or something. So there's already ways to do that. The problem though is that other build systems don't they're just generic. They don't understand Gatsby, and they don't try to make anyways, they just don't know how to make Gatsby builds faster. They don't even do like really basic stuff like, keep the cache around. So a lot of what, anyways, so a long story short is that incremental builds is already open source. What we're doing in Gatsby Cloud is not so much improving like the cache is already good. A lot of what we're doing in Gatsby Cloud to speed things up is to like parallelize a lot of work. So we're doing like a really interesting bit so that anything that's like really kind of like CPU or IO intensive, like processing images is a really, common thing. We'll now offload that from the build container into workers so that, effectively you get, when work can be parallelized, we'll do that. And so instead of having like kind of sequential work, like the CPU is just like one after another, we can have a whole bunch of workers that are like processing all in parallel on your build, which will make things a lot faster. But most of what we're doing in Gatsby Cloud is really just having a much better, we just have perfect support for Gatsby. Excuse me. We just have perfect support for Gatsby's cache, and we have a lot more focus on making builds fast. So again, yeah, it is already an open source. You can set up your existing CI services with some work to make things faster. And then what we're doing in Gatsby Cloud is kind of a refinement and a lot of like extra improvements that, once, because we fully control the build environment, we can do a lot of stuff that would never make any sense for like a generic CI system to do, or even for you to do like on your own service. Because at the end of the day also, I mean, this just has to be a cloud service. Like it has to be running in the cloud, always has to be live, always has to be reliable. Because anytime anybody is changing content, anyone's pushing code, like it has to work. It has to immediately build, immediately deploy, be 100% reliable, because otherwise you're just going to be causing a lot of friction. And that's why nobody really builds their own CI service, generally speaking. I mean, people, use these different hosted ones because they need that reliability and security that things are going to just work. And so what we're doing is like providing another service like that, but that's specific for Gatsby and has a lot of, and just because we build Gatsby, we know it's right. Then it works.
Okay, great. So our next question is, are there any plans to support other CMS providers for Gatsby Cloud, specifically self-hosted ones such as Strapi?
Yeah, so we've talked to Strapi quite a few times. There's a good source plugin for that. Basically, we're just working through like kind of like the top used CMSs, and the goal is to get to all of them. We also have a kind of an integration guide. So interested CMS vendors or open source projects like Strapi can work with that to improve the integration. With Drupal and WordPress, what we're doing also is we're talking to Drupal WordPress hosting companies to kind of like set up sort of more automatic integrations. Anyways, and that's something we'd love to do with Strapi as well. But generally speaking, if your CMS has a good source plugin, then it'll just work on Gatsby Cloud. Like Gatsby Cloud is, just running, the normal Gatsby build process, and so any plugin should work.
Okay, great. Our next question is, many clients are asking us to try out Next.js. How can we convince them that Gatsby is better?
So, I mean, I'd have to have a lot more context around why they're asking. Generally speaking, there's a lot of overlap, obviously, between Gatsby and Next because they're both kind of frameworks around, that use React. Yeah, so I mean, where Gatsby really differentiates from Next is, providing support for kind of traditional CMS like workflows. So, preview gives content editors, marketers a kind of a real-time preview of stuff. And also, we have a lot of support for just kind of like, having like a richer, easier setup between a CMS and your site. So Where with Next, it's much lower level. So like with sufficient effort, you can like build out what Gatsby does, but what you would tell them is, well, we could build this with Next, but you would end up paying for a lot more development for things that Gatsby gives us for free. And also, I mean, Gatsby is like community supported, so it's going to all these plugins and extensions and integrations are going to be supported. So we hand this project to somebody else, and who knows what's going to happen. So it's like with Gatsby, though, it's a much better guarantee that it's going to be continued to be like a really nice, smooth experience into the future.
Okay. Our next question is, how does Gatsby Cloud scale to something like a blog with 5,000 posts? If I make an update to the global footer, does it build all 5,000 posts at once?
So yeah, so when you update something that's global, incremental builds doesn't, I mean, there still is a lot that is incremental. So like a good so it's like the HTML itself would have to be rebuilt, but like a lot of, we wouldn't have to recreate all the page data files, for example, for each post. But this is where Gatsby Cloud's ability to parallelize work really comes into handy, because building, server rendering the HTML files for your site is something that can be easily done in parallel. So whereas, rendering the 5,000 post in a normal build server where everything has to be done sequentially, that might take like a minute or two. But with Gatsby Cloud, this can be done in like 15, 20 seconds type thing. So, it doesn't, when you make updates to global things, like you do have to rebuild all the HTML, but because Gatsby can parallelize that, Gatsby Cloud can parallelize that work across, many workers, it still ends up being quite fast.
Our next question is, how do Gatsby builds compare with Netlify?
So yeah, so in a lot of ways, they're quite similar in the sense that, you push up a PR to GitHub, and Gatsby builds will, build your site and give you a unique URL so that you can look at like what that, the changes in your PR, how they would look on the real site. It has like when you push the master, merge the master, it rebuilds the site and deploys it to wherever you're hosting it. The big difference is that Netlify combines the builds with the hosting. So if you want to use their build service and preview service, you're also, locked into using their CDN. Where we're, we're kind of agnostic. You can actually build on Gatsby and then host your site with Netlify, along with a number of other kind of like CDN hosting options. And the other big difference is that like Netlify has like pretty stock standard build setup. They're using Docker containers on, you're running Docker containers and you have kind of like a single node process. There's no parallelization. They cache some stuff, so they cache like node modules, but they don't cache any of Gatsby stuff. So in general, Gatsby builds is the same experience, just from kind of like a workflow perspective, but everything is much, much, much faster.
Okay. Our next question is, are there other tools you can use to measure or monitor performance in Gatsby?
I'm assuming you're referring to Lighthouse. And Lighthouse is like a really nice effort. Google Chrome has put a lot of effort into creating it, and I would say it's kind of the gold standard for this sort of thing. Some other tools that I do really like is Web Page Test. Is a free service that you can test your site's performance on, and it's actually really, it gives you really, really detailed information. And so I highly recommend looking at that, because it's really helpful when you're trying to debug like little nitty gritty stuff to figure out like, okay, like what's going on here? Like, why is this getting slowed down? Because you can see, all the domains you're connecting to and the exact order of things, and like when something, when one request is blocking another. Like I've spent like I don't know, probably 100+ hours in web page test over the years. It's been super helpful for just like trying out different like performance optimizations in Gatsby, because you can like, okay, what if we change because Gatsby kind of like compiles your components. So it's like, what if we change this bit in like the build process and like how we're structuring the final HTML? Like, does that have a reliable improvement? And you can just like build 2 different versions and then stick on a web page test and see like very detailed information. But generally speaking, like Lighthouse is kind of what you want, because it just gives you a nice, consistent, accurate, high-level view of how you're doing. And that's why we're, integrating it into Gatsby Cloud, because it's something that everyone can understand from engineering, management, marketing, et cetera. Is that if the Lighthouse performance score is high, then like things are good. If it drops significantly, that's going to have a real impact on the business outcomes for the site.
Okay. Our next question is, all this is free? I'm in love with the serverless concept, and they are enjoying this too much.
I'm glad to hear, Shinky.js, that you're loving this. Yeah, serverless is amazing because serverless, you pay for what you actually use. You don't have to sort of provision the whole server that you may or may not use, and so it allows you to get a lot more stuff, because like traditional hosting providers, they have to allocate like a bunch of disk space and a bunch of CPU space for each person, regardless of whether it's being used or not. Where with us, it's like we're just sort of sharing it all like really dynamically. So anyways, it ends up being that's like a lot cheaper. So we do have a generous free tier because serverless is cheaper for us. Like we pass that on to you, and you can do a lot of stuff with Gatsby Cloud for free. We do, however, have we are a business, so at some point you do need to pay, like as kind of the size and scope of your site grows. So generally speaking, how we explain it is Gatsby Cloud is free for experiments, for personal sites, for even for like smaller sites that you might build for clients. But then as kind of, as they get larger and you're using a lot more of Gatsby Cloud, then there is kind of utility price pricing tiers that kind of grow as the size of your site grows.
Okay. Our next question is, will there be a WordPress integration for Gatsby Cloud?
Yes, this is something we hear a ton. I mean, WordPress is obviously tremendously popular, amazing CMS, and we are super interested in having first-class integration between WordPress and Gatsby Cloud. So we have 2 full-time engineers that are working on this that we've hired out of the WordPress world, and they're really stoked to bring Gatsby to WordPress. And we don't have an exact timeline, but they've been posting kind of like updates on their work, and things are looking really promising for having like really fast preview updates, so that editors can like. Our goal basically is that you can convert a WordPress site to being used. You can normal WordPress site to WordPress plus Gatsby on Gatsby Cloud, and then everything will be the same. Like you won't have to retrain people at all. So they can like click on preview and they'll see a preview from Gatsby Cloud just like normal, with like the changes. And they click save, and then with incremental builds, it'll rebuild the site in a few seconds, and it'll be live. And so that's kind of the goal we're going for, is that the whether it's like PHP or Gatsby, it'll be sort of interchangeable as far as you're concerned, and you don't have to like compromise.
The next question is, on your pricing page, what does up to XX real-time edits per day mean?
Yeah, so one of the kind of core principles, I guess, for design principles around everything we do with Gatsby is that productivity and creativity comes from being able to make a change and then see how that affects kind of the artifact that you're creating, like in real time. So if I assume most of you have used Gatsby locally, and you're running Gatsby Develop, and like anything you change from like a markdown file to a React component, it hot reloads into the browser. And we do that because that's the best way as a creative person to be productive and to get things done. And so with Gatsby Cloud, we're taking that same ethos to kind of cloud-driven workflows. because there's a lot of things that can't happen in the local dev environment. Like we can't give content editors a preview experience locally because they're not going to be able to install Node on their machine and run it whenever they want to like edit something. It has to be something that's like hosted, but they need real-time edits just as much as you do when you're working on code. So anyway, so that's kind of like the key value that we're providing to everyone, and so that's also what we're charging on. So whenever you make, so anyway, so long story short is a real-time edit is anytime you change code or content and then see the update. And so basically, the more, this just sort of aligns your incentives with our incentives. It's like the more value you get from Gatsby Cloud, the more you're using it, then the amount that we charge is kind of would grow with that. So yeah.
Okay. So our next question is, will themes get more support for being sharp knife tools? For example, currently unused shadowed queries are still run and may throw warnings or break the build.
Yeah, so that's something that's on our radar. I know I've seen discussions amongst the open source team about that issue. I'm not entirely sure what the consensus is about how to solve it or when it'll be solved. But yeah, like just themes is something that we are going to be investing a lot in the next year. We want to, or we'll be in the new year starting to hire up a team specifically around themes. There's a lot of stuff we can do to improve kind of the DX of themes because they work, but as you point out, there's like a lot of little kind of nagging problems with building and using themes. And then also we want to create a number of kind of like base themes and child themes, so like emulating what other theme ecosystems do, so that more and more sites can just pick like a really high quality Gatsby theme to start from, and then just go from there. So there's a lot of cool stuff we'll be doing.
Great. So the next question is, I put a static Gatsby site in S3 bucket. For HTTPS, I needed to use CloudFront. And I guess this resulted in very high bandwidth usage and too many calls to the server. What to do, or what should they do about that?
I'm unfortunately not an expert on AWS. I know people have reported successfully using Gatsby and S3 and AWS in general together, but where you need to go, I'm not really sure. I believe I've seen like articles around. I mean, I definitely have seen articles around this. So maybe just kind of Google static sites and AWS and see if you can find some tutorials or suggestions on what you can do.
Cool. Okay, our next question is, will there be a Craft CMS integration for Gatsby Cloud?
Yes, we have talked to the Craft CMS folks quite a few times, and the PM over this I saw just this week, maybe, just had another conversation about kind of next steps for working on that. So yeah, Craft CMS has a great product. Is a great product. We're really excited to support it in Gatsby Cloud, and hopefully in the next few months we'll have something ready to go for that. I know they're very excited about adding support as well. So it's something we're working on together.
Great. All right, our next question is, will Gatsby Cloud introduce something to long-term cache files like videos or images which take a long time to process and change rarely?
Absolutely. This is one of the biggest causes of slowdowns for building Gatsby sites, is that, like I mentioned earlier, most like generic CI servers do not know how to cache Gatsby builds properly. And being the creators of Gatsby, and of course really caring about doing this right, we'll be doing exactly this. Like stuff like videos and images rarely change, and we'll be able to store all of them. And and caching things like this will go a long ways towards making builds on Gatsby Cloud a lot faster than they are on other services.
Okay. All right, so we've got a couple questions and about 15 minutes left. Again, we're going to be here, or, we're open to being here for another 15 minutes or so. So if you do have more questions, please do feel free to input those on Slido. But now we'll move on to Richard's question, which is, you work with the WPGraphQL plugin developer. Are there any plans to implement WordPress compatibility with Gatsby Cloud, and how soon?
Yeah, so we had a similar question earlier. They're working hard on adding preview and incremental build support to WordPress. And we don't have an exact timeline, but it's not on the order of months that they should have something ready to go. Yeah, and if you're really interested in this, feel free to start joining in. All their work is in open source, either on the WPGraphQL repo, or we're also working on a v4 of Gatsby source WordPress, which integrates with WPGraphQL, so you can help jump in. I mean, they have lots of activity on both of those, so you can jump in and help as well if you like.
Great. All right, and our current last question is, I have a personal blog with Gatsby, but GitHub is sending me a lot of notifications about library vulnerabilities. Why is that?
It's they're trying to be helpful. So I mean, this is like an issue in software that people build software applications with libraries, and then it's discovered later that certain versions of the library is vulnerable in some way to some sort of automated or manual attack. And GitHub is trying to make software work better in general. And so one way that they've decided to do that is to scan everyone's code and then tell you when they see something that could be a problem. A lot of people think that they're a little overly aggressive about it. They don't give you, it's not an opt-in thing. I don't know if you can opt out of it. And also a lot of library vulnerabilities are more theoretical than an actual problem. Particularly with Gatsby, that most vulnerabilities only arise when you have code that's running exposed to attackers. But given that Gatsby never runs on kind of the open internet that anybody can access, you're not even possible, no one can attack it. Anyway, so the best thing to do is to basically just keep your software upgraded. So if you run npm upgrade locally, then npm will upgrade your packages to the latest versions, which generally speaking won't have any more vulnerabilities, because once there's a vulnerability discovered, it'll get fixed, and so the newer versions of libraries will be fine.
All right. Our next question is, are there plans not to include the React bundle on pages that do not use React?
There is not. So there's a few things here. So first is that the reason for building Gatsby with React in the first place is that it's a very productive way to create sites and to kind of develop sites. And it also makes it really easy to take a page and then add interactivity, because you can have a blog post and then you can add a form to subscribe to something or whatever. And adding that sort of client-side interactivity is very straightforward with React, much more so than WordPress and jQuery. And also having React makes possible a lot of Gatsby speed comes from React, because instead of having to do a server request for a new HTTP, say you click on a link, instead of having to refresh the page, Gatsby can pull in the code and data for the next page and refresh and so forth. Also, that sort of client-side rendering and transitions is very efficient and actually uses a lot less data than normal pages do. So generally speaking, using React is more performant, saves data, and it's just a lot more pleasant developer-wise. And we'll be able to make this even more performant and nice in the future with some feature enhancements of the React core team they're working on. One of which is called like partial hydration, which means that you only have to run the JavaScript that you only have to run JavaScript when a user interacts with something on the page. And so what would happen is there would we wouldn't need to run any React code or component code until somebody starts interacting with something. So if a page truly is static, then it actually would be static. So in that way, we kind of get the best of both worlds, which is like a really smooth development experience, really fast page transitions, but no kind of potential performance implications.
Great. All right, we have a few more questions. So our next one is, how would you explain Gatsby to a client more familiar with traditional websites powered by WordPress, etc.?
Our goal is that you don't really have to explain Gatsby. So the only reason that you would have to explain it is if something changes about how they build sites or how they manage the site. But with as these integrations get better and better, like I was saying with WordPress, like once you can click preview and you see a preview and you click save and like the site's deployed, you can present a client with a WordPress Gatsby or a Drupal Gatsby or Contentful Gatsby or Sanity Gatsby site, and they'll just be like, with a little bit of orientation, they'll be like, oh, cool, this is nice, and they won't, have any problems. Like the downside to static sites has always been there's a lot of like kind of developer wonkery about it, which is like confusing to non-technical people. Because you're like, oh yeah, you have to like run it locally in order to see a preview of what the or whatever, but the less that sort of developer wonkery is shown to develop to the non-technical folks that are involved in the website, the less they care. Because do you explain PHP to clients? Do you explain databases to clients? Do you explain like caching of database queries or whatever? I mean, there's all sorts of things that you don't have to talk about because what you're presenting to them is like a simple abstraction that the traditional CMS provides. And so the closer, the better Gatsby Cloud gets, integrations gets, and so forth get. You won't have to explain things to people. It'll just be, we could have built this WordPress site with PHP templates, but instead we decided to do it with Gatsby. But that's just a developer designer kind of decision, and the client doesn't necessarily have to have an opinion about that or even know that it's happening.
Great. All right, next question. I'm just getting started with static sites. Can you help me understand why I would use Gatsby at all?
Yeah, so static site, well, congratulations first for jumping in. There's a lot of interesting ideas and possibilities in this world. So Gatsby is great because it gives you a kind of a pre-configured development environment, production build environment, so that you can just jump in and start creating React components, start creating pages, start editing stuff, and kind of really quickly get to something interesting. Also, Gatsby is designed for like professional developers, and like a lot of professionals use it. So it's meant to be very accessible to people getting started, but also like scale really well with you. So people have built like incredibly, like some of the best websites I've ever seen, have been built with Gatsby. And we regularly talk to really high quality agencies and so forth. And before I started working on Gatsby, I was like a professional web developer for like 10 years. So and a lot of what Gatsby is kind of everything I learned about web development like poured into like a framework that worked exactly how I always wanted it to. So yeah, so Gatsby is like great to get started with. It has a great ecosystem, a great community. It's very friendly. We have a lot of docs to like teach you different stuff, and it can scale and kind of go with you wherever you need to go.
All right. Our next question is, how do you convince clients who run static sites on ASP.NET to use Gatsby? How do you know the way they build is old-fashioned, or if you know the way they build is old-fashioned and hard to maintain, yeah, how do you convince them?
Yeah, I mean, there has to be something about. So I mean, yeah. So like, if you're asking someone to do a migration, I mean, you're asking them to make an investment in the website. So first they have to like care enough about the website to want to you know, pay for a change. And so yeah, so you know, you have to like establish like this is taking a lot of your time, like this is causing a lot of trouble. And then you just like have to show how Gatsby you know, makes those problems a lot nicer. We actually have a section of the website that's all around how to talk to a client about Gatsby. And so for something like this where you're arguing for migration, I would go there and kind of like, you know, use some of the talking points there about like why Gatsby you know, improves business outcomes. You know, it makes your site faster. It helps, you know, you as the developer maintain it easier and like build better stuff. And also like common things that they do to maintain the website are a lot nicer.
Great. All right, we've got 6 questions and 3 minutes left, so we'll try to move through these pretty quickly. All right, are the Gatsby Cloud selectable starters the same as plain old Gatsby starters, or is there some extra API for something like user choices?
Yeah, so right now you can't select your own starters. Well, I take that back. What you can do is if you have a repo already, then you can you can just add it to Gatsby Cloud and start using it. We have some starters, you know, that you're just like, I don't have something, I just want to like play around with something, or kind of build off, you know, one of the starters. And then in the future, we're going to add support for any number of starters. So like all the starters in gatsbyjs.org will be available there. Plus like any of your own starters that you've created, you'll be able to like build from that as well.
Great. All right, next is, what is the best way to contribute to Gatsby?
We have a ton of ways. You can help improve docs, you know, make edits or refinements. There's code changes. Generally speaking, like, you know, open source works best when everyone kind of scratches your own itch. It's like whatever you want to see improve, whatever kind of annoys you, just kind of dig in and see if you can make it better. Because you know, open source is like a lot of people who all care about different things, and we work together to, you know, make things better together.
Great. All right, next is, we get Webpack chunk load errors when we deploy as Netlify drops the last build files. Will builds better support deployments where there are active sessions?
Um, so this might, uh, so that shouldn't happen even on Netlify. I would be curious what's happening here. You might be on an older version of Gatsby because I know we've had some issues that we fixed around this in the past. If you are on the latest version, we'd love to hear, like, we'd love if you write up an issue about what you're seeing and see if we can fix this, because this should work with however you deploy the site.
All right. Our next question. I'm a bit confused by the for-profit rhetoric. Is Gatsby going to be free forever?
Yeah, so I mean, what's open source is always going to be open source. What we're doing, as you know, with Gatsby Cloud is building cloud services that you can use with Gatsby. So if you're using Gatsby, you're already using cloud services. What we're trying to do is build ones that are, you know, very focused on Gatsby and better and more comprehensive than what you'll get elsewhere.
Okay. And we are at the hour. Kyle, do you have time to answer a few more questions, or shall we wrap up?
Yeah, a few more minutes.
All right.
My main constraint is my battery.
Okay. Well, we'll try to go quickly. So this next question is, are there plans to add more documentation on building e-commerce websites with Gatsby? There are very few resources on integrations for BigCommerce, Shopify, etc.
Yes, definitely. So this is going to also be a big focus in the new year. So like I mentioned earlier, we're hiring up a themes team to both build themes, but also like create documentation and so forth, so that you know, you want an e-commerce site. There'll be great docs. There'll be a great theme with all the components and everything else you need to you know, build a kick-ass e-commerce site. So there is some tutorials on Shopify. BigCommerce, they just barely released their Gatsby source plugin, so their, you know, documentation might be falling behind a bit.
Okay. All right, the next one is, are there plans to make improvements for I18 next? It's been a couple of months, but first go at it didn't seem to work with the available plugins.
Yeah, so generally speaking, yeah, so basically our plan here is that, I mean, we've had a small kind of learning documentation team, and they've been doing great work. And then we just knew there was a lot more that needed documented, and so recently we've hired 4 more kind of learning engineers. And I know this is very high on their priority list to document for people, because yeah, it's a common question. Like a lot of people, I mean, there's been a lot of like 18 insights built with Gatsby, so it's like definitely very doable. But yeah, there's definitely some like tricky bits that we would love to help more people work through in order to like ship more 18 sites.
Great. And our last question, what are some of the more surprising challenges you've run into having started as an open source project and now having VC funding?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess like in a lot of ways it's nice because the classic dilemma with open source projects is that you start it and then you get really burnt out because everyone starts using it and then everyone expects you to do maintenance for free. And the nice thing about VC funding and building a company around an open source project is that we can hire people to help out with the maintenance, because the maintenance burden is huge. Like we have something like 15 people working full time on open source now. Like Gatsby is enormous. Like there's so much happening, that needs worked on, and there's no way that we'd be anywhere close to this large without VC funding. But I think that I guess the main challenge, I guess, is just the larger you get. Yeah, there's just a lot of like new challenges, I guess. They aren't necessarily harder per se, but they're just like brand new that that I have to deal with, my co-founder and I have to deal with as the company grows. Like we're now approaching 50 people in the company, and as companies grow, the organizational challenges get more difficult, and like how do we figure out what we work on, and like how do we ensure that like quality is high when I'm not necessarily involved or even know what's going on and everything. And that can be pretty tricky. But yeah, I don't know. It's a nice problem to have. It's like the bigger we get, the larger the opportunity there is to continue to further the mission of Gatsby, which is to help people build for the modern web. And we feel like there's just like a ton of improvements that can be made. We just look around at what people do to build sites, and we're just shaking our heads all the time. Like this can be so much better. And we're excited to create the community, create the open source tools, create kind of a business model to fund the development of all of this, and help a lot of great websites get built, and a lot of people have a lot of fun doing that.
Great. All right. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you all for joining us in the webinar today. And thank you, Kyle, for giving this awesome presentation.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
All right. See ya.
Okay. Bye-bye.